The man with the ledger cleared his throat. His name was Blevins, and the sound he made was wet and final, like mud sliding into a grave. "And finally," he announced, his voice booming across the sun-scorched town square, Lot 24. "The contract of indenture for the woman, Alara." A low murmur rippled through the assembled crowd. It was not a sound of sympathy. It was the sound of bored curiosity, the same noise they made when a horse with a bad leg was brought out. Alara stood on the rough-hewn wooden platform. She did not look at them. She had learned long ago that looking at them only invited more of their particular brand of cruelty. Instead, she stared at the splintered floorboards beneath her feet. She focused on a single dark knot in the wood, a whorl that looked like a closed eye. She imagined herself shrinking, becoming small enough to crawl into that knot and disappear. "As you know," Blevins continued, his tone a greasy mix of salesmanship and condescension, "her father, a man of unfortunate circumstance, has placed her services on the market to settle his debts." He was not a man of unfortunate circumstance. He was a man of whiskey and bad bets. Alara knew this. The town knew this. But the fiction was necessary for the transaction. "She is sturdy," Blevins said, the word a careful insult. He gestured a thick hand in her direction. "Wide-hipped and heavy-footed, as you can see. Not a creature for the parlor, perhaps, but for good, honest labor." A few men in the crowd chuckled. The sound was coarse like stones grinding together. Alara felt the heat rise in her neck, a familiar, helpless flush of shame. She was 22 years old. She was tall and strong. Her hands were calloused from mending fences, hauling water, and breaking soil that refused to yield. Her face was plain, her hair a simple brown pulled back so tightly it made her scalp ache. She had never been called beautiful. She had never expected to be, but to be appraised like a draft animal, to have her physical being dissected and devalued in public, was a fresh and profound kind of violation. "She can cook and clean, of course," Blevins droned on. "And she has a head for letters and numbers, should you need an account tallied. Though I wouldn't trust a woman with much more than adding up the grocery bill." More laughter, louder this time. Something inside Alara, a thing that had been sleeping for a long, long time, flickered awake. It was a cold, hard kernel of rage. She had tallied her father's ledgers for years. She was the only reason his failing farm had not collapsed a decade ago. She understood crop rotation, water tables, and the brutal arithmetic of loans and interest better than any man in this square. Her mind was a sharp, well-honed tool, and this pig of a man was dismissing it as a trifle. She lifted her head. She looked directly at Blevins. Her eyes, a pale, washed-out gray that most people found unmemorable, were suddenly sharp as flint. Blevins faltered for a half-second, the flow of his patter interrupted by her direct gaze. He saw not a cowgirl, but something else, something he did not recognize. "The contract is for 5 years of service." He recovered quickly, his voice a little louder, a little more bullying. "To the man who will take on her father's debt of $200. Silence. $200 was a significant sum. And for 5 years of a plain, large woman who was neither pretty enough to be a prize nor docile enough to be invisible, it was a bad bargain. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. This was the true humiliation. Not the auction, but the lack of a bid. The public declaration of her worthlessness. Alara felt her defiance crumble back into dust. The shame returned, colder and heavier than before. Her gaze dropped back to the floorboards. He was right. She was worthless. "A fine specimen of a woman," a voice called out, laced with mockery. "Good for plowing, I'd wager." The crowd erupted in laughter. It was a tidal wave of scorn, and it washed over her, and she thought she might drown in it. Her hands, resting at her sides, clenched into fists, her short nails digging into her palms. She did not hear the approach of a new figure from the edge of the square. She did not see the way the crowd parted for him, their laughter dying in their throats. She only registered a new shadow falling over her, blocking the harsh sun. "I'll take the contract." The voice was low and calm. It was not a voice for public squares. It was a voice for quiet rooms and open plains. It cut through the thick air of derision like a sharp knife. Alara looked up. The man was tall, but not in a way that commanded attention. He seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. He wore dusty, functional clothes, worn jeans, a faded flannel shirt, and a battered hat that shadowed his face. He was not handsome in the way the town's few wealthy sons were. His face was weathered, all angles and planes, carved by sun and wind. His eyes were the color of a winter sky, and they were not looking at her body. They were looking at her face. At her eyes. Blevins puffed up, smelling his sail. Excellent. A man of vision. You see her value, sir. $200 for the debt, and she is yours. The man's gaze did not waver from Alaris. He seemed to be assessing her, but not in the way Blevins had. He looked at her the way a man looks at a fence that needs mending or a sky that threatens rain, calculating what was required without judgment. The debt is $200, the man said, his voice still quiet, yet carrying to every corner of the square. I will pay it, but she's not mine. I am purchasing a contract for labor. Nothing more. He took a worn leather purse from his belt and counted out the money onto a barrelhead next to Blevins. The coins made a series of dull, final thuds. Blevins, nonplussed but eager for the cash, scooped it up. As you wish, Mr. Holt. The contract is yours. He held out a piece of paper. She's all yours. The man, Holt, ignored the paper. He stepped up onto the platform. He stopped a few feet from Alara. He took off his hat. It was a simple gesture of respect, but in that place at that moment, it was as shocking as a thunderclap. The townspeople watched, confused. This was not part of the familiar drama. Miss, he said, his voice even lower now, meant only for her. My name is Silas Holt. The transaction is complete. You can come down now. Alara stared at him. She had been bought. The shame of it was a physical weight pressing the air from her lungs. She couldn't move. The knot in the floorboard seemed to be staring back at her. Silas Holt waited. He did not rush her. He did not touch her. He just stood there, his hat in his hands, waiting. The silence was his now. He owned it. Finally, her legs obeyed a command she didn't realize she had given. She stepped down from the platform. Her landing was clumsy, heavy. She stumbled. Before she could fall, his hand was there, not grabbing, just steadying. A firm, warm pressure on her elbow. His hands were like his face, weathered and capable. The contact was brief, impersonal, and over in a second. He turned and started walking toward a wagon parked at the far end of the square, assuming she would follow. She did. She had no choice. As she walked behind him, the whispers started again, a snake slithering through the dust. Silas Holt? What's he want with her? His place is failing. He's just throwing good money after bad. Alara heard it all. Each word was a small stone thrown at her back. She kept her eyes on the ground, tracing the path of his dusty boots. They left the square behind. The noise of the town faded. He led her down a narrow, empty alley between the general store and the smithy. The air grew cooler in the shadows. He stopped. She stopped a few feet behind him, her heart pounding. This was it. This was where he would lay out his terms. This was where the man who had bought her would tell her what he truly expected. He turned to face her. She braced herself, but he didn't speak. He just watched her. And in the sudden, quiet privacy of the alley, the dam inside her broke. The humiliation, the rage, the terror, it all came pouring out. A single, hot tear slid down her cheek. Then another. She did not sob. She did not make a sound. The tears just fell, a silent testament to a spirit that had been pushed too far. She squeezed her eyes shut, furious at this show of weakness. When she opened them again, he was still there, watching. But his expression had changed. The assessing look was gone. In its place was something she could not name. It was not pity. It was something quieter, more solid. She had to say something, to prove she was not just a weeping, worthless thing. I will not be your whore, she whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. It was a desperate, foolish thing to say. A challenge. A plea. Silas Holt's expression did not change. He seemed to consider her words, not as an insult, but as a statement of fact. I did not ask you to be, he said simply. The raw emotion of the day finally spilled over. Then what do you want? Why buy me? Everyone knows your ranch is on its last legs. You don't have $200 to throw away on. On me, the last word was a choked whisper. I need another hand, he said, and I do not hold with the buying and selling of people. I bought a debt, Mississippi, to keep Blevins from selling it to someone who would think they bought more. She stared at him, suspicion warring with a desperate, burgeoning hope. I have a room for you, he continued, his voice a low rumble. It has a lock on the inside. You will have the key. You will be paid a wage for your work, from which the debt will be subtracted over time. You are free to leave whenever you wish. The debt will follow you, I'm afraid, but your person will not be bound. Alara could not process it. A lock, a wage, the freedom to leave. These were concepts from a world she did not inhabit. I don't believe you, she said, the words automatic, a shield she had carried for years. She had made a vow in the silent moments on that platform, a vow never to trust a man's kindness, for it was always a lie, a down payment on a future cruelty. I'm not asking you to, Silas said. He put his hat back on his head. The shadow returned to his face. I'm asking you to work. The rest you will see for yourself. He started walking again toward the wagon. She stood alone in the alley for a long moment, the cool shadows a comfort. He had offered her a room with a lock. He had offered her a wage. He had called her miss. Her tears had stopped. In their place was a profound and unsettling confusion. She took a deep breath, the air thick with the smell of coal, smoke from the smithy, and dust from the street. She had made a vow, never trust, never hope, survive. But survival now meant following this strange, quiet man. She straightened her shoulders, wiped her face with the back of her hand, and walked out of the alley and toward the wagon, toward Silas Holt, toward a future she could not begin to imagine. The wagon was old, its wood weathered to a silver gray. The two horses hitched to it were lean, but well cared for, their coats brushed clean. Silas was loading a sack of flour into the back. He did it with an economy of motion, a quiet competence that seemed to be his defining trait. He saw her approach and stopped. He gestured to the wagon seat. It's a long ride. She climbed up, her movement stiff. The seat was worn smooth. He climbed up beside her, the wagon dipping under his weight. He smelled of hay and dust and clean sweat. It was not an unpleasant smell. It was the smell of work. He picked up the reins. Are you hungry? He asked, his eyes on the road ahead. The question caught her off guard. It was so simple, so basic. No one had asked her that in years. Food was something that was either provided or not, a fact of life, not a matter of inquiry. I'm fine, she said automatically. He didn't reply. He just clucked to the horses, and the wagon lurched forward, pulling them away from the town of Harmony Creek, a place that had offered her neither. The ride was silent for the first hour. The landscape unfolded around them, dry and unforgiving. The sun beat down. Alara kept her hands clasped in her lap, her back ramrod straight. She was acutely aware of the man beside her, of the space between them. He did not try to fill the silence. He seemed comfortable in it, a part of it. After a while, he reached down beside his boot and pulled up a small, grease-stained paper parcel. He held it out to her. It's just a biscuit, he said, from the diner. Ate the other one this morning. She stared at the parcel. Hunger, which she had been ruthlessly suppressing all day, clawed at her stomach. The last thing she had eaten was a stale crust of bread at dawn. I'm not, she started to say, the old pride rising up. You need to eat, he said. It was not a suggestion. It was a statement of fact, like saying the sky was blue. He didn't push the parcel at her, just held it in the space between them. An offering. Slowly, she reached out and took it. Her fingers brushed his. His skin was rough, calloused. The contact sent a strange jolt through her. She unwrapped the paper. Inside was a large, flaky biscuit filled with a piece of fried salt pork. She hesitated, looking at him. He understood. He turned his head, deliberately looking out at the passing landscape, giving her the privacy to eat without being watched. It was the first act of non-transactional kindness she had received in memory. It was a small thing, a biscuit, a turned head, but it was everything. She ate. She did not devour it like a starved animal. She took small, deliberate bites, chewing slowly. The biscuit was warm, the pork salty. It was the most delicious thing she had ever tasted. It tasted of a kindness so profound it frightened her. When she was finished, she carefully folded the greasy paper and tucked it into her pocket. Silas said nothing. He just kept driving, but she felt the tension in her shoulders ease by a fraction. The sun was beginning to set when they turned off the main track onto a barely there path. The land here was rockier, more challenging. This was his land, Stony Creek Ranch. She could see why it had its name. A shallow, rock-strewn creek bed ran parallel to the path. It was bone-dry. "Creek hasn't run properly in 2 years," Silas said, as if reading her thoughts. "Not since Sterling built his new dam upstream." The name Sterling meant nothing to her, but the dry creek bed told its own story, a story of struggle. They crested a small rise, and she saw the ranch house. It was a simple one-story structure made of timber and stone, hunkered down against the wind. It looked tired. A few shutters hung at odd angles. The porch sagged. Around it, several outbuildings were in various states of disrepair. The whole place had the look of a man fighting a losing battle against time and gravity. It was a mess, and the part of her that understood systems, the part that craved order, felt a strange, unwelcome pull. An old man emerged from the barn as they pulled up. He was bent and wiry, with a face like a dried apple. He moved with the slow, deliberate pace of someone who had worked this land his entire life. "Jeb," Silas said, nodding to him. The old man, Jeb, looked from Silas to Alara, his eyes sharp and curious. He took in her plain dress, her large frame, her tired face. His expression was unreadable. "This is Miss Alara," Silas said. "She'll be working with us." Jeb grunted. It was a sound that could have meant anything. He didn't offer a greeting. He just looked at Alara, then back at Silas. "Pump's acting up again. The one at the north well." "I'll look at it in the morning," Silas said, his voice tight with a weariness that went bone deep. He helped her down from the wagon, his hand briefly at her elbow again. He led her to the house. The inside was as she expected. It was a man's house, functional and neglected. Dishes were piled in a basin. Dust lay thick on every surface that wasn't in immediate use. The air was stale. It was chaos. It was a problem to be solved. "The kitchen is not in order," Silas said, a flush of what looked like embarrassment creeping up his neck. "I've seen worse," Alara said, and it was the truth. He led her down a short hall to a small room at the back. It contained a narrow bed with a thin mattress, a small wooden chest, and a washstand. It was stark, but the window looked out over the open land, and it was clean, cleaner than the rest of the house. He had prepared it for her. "This is your room," he said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an old iron key. He held out to her. "The lock is on the inside." She took the key. It was heavy and cool in her palm. It felt more real, more substantial than the $200 that had defined her day. "Supper will be ready in an hour," he said. If you want to rest." He seemed awkward and used to having another person in his space. He backed out of the room, pulling the door almost closed behind him. Alara stood in the center of the small room, the key clutched in her hand. She walked to the door and closed it. She turned the key in the lock. The click of the bolt sliding into place was the loudest, most beautiful sound she had ever heard. She was in a room with a door that locked from the inside. She was safe. For now. She leaned her forehead against the cool wood of the door and closed her eyes. She did not cry this time. She just breathed. Chug. Alara did not rest. Rest was a luxury she couldn't afford. The disarray of the house was a challenge, a territory she could conquer. It was a language she understood. She left her room, leaving the door unlocked as a small, silent statement she couldn't have articulated. She went to the kitchen. For a moment, she just stood there, assessing the problem. It wasn't just dirty, it was inefficient. The layout was wrong. Tools were stored far from where they were used. The path from the stove to the sink was obstructed. It was a system on the verge of collapse. She started. She found a bucket and a rag. She heated water on the big, cast-iron stove. She scrubbed the countertops her arms moving with a steady, practiced rhythm. She washed every dish, every pot, every pan, the clang of metal on metal kind of music. She didn't just clean, she organized. She found a logical place for everything. Spices near the stove, knives near the cutting board, plates and cups near the table. She imposed order on the chaos, her mind and body working in perfect, silent unison. Silas came an hour later, carrying a bucket of fresh milk. He stopped dead in the doorway. The kitchen was transformed. It was not just clean, it was functional. The air smelled of soap and lemon, not stale dust. A pot of water was simmering on the stove for coffee. He looked at the clean surfaces, the neatly stacked dishes. He looked at her. She was standing by the stove, her face flushed from the heat, a smudge of soot on her cheek. She looked powerful. "You didn't have to do this," he said, his voice rough. "It needed doing," she replied, not meeting his eye. She was a contract laborer. This was her labor. He put the milk bucket down. He walked to the shelf where the cups were now neatly arranged. He took one down. He seemed to marvel at the simple act of it. That night, they ate supper at a clean table. It was a simple meal of beans and bread, but it felt different. Order had been restored to this small corner of his world. Silas ate silently, but he kept glancing around the room, as if seeing it for the first time. When he was finished, he pushed his plate back. Supper was good, he said. It was, Ilera knew, the highest form of praise he was capable of. It was more than she had gotten from her father in a lifetime. A small, cautious warmth spread in her chest. She promptly ignored it. The next morning, she was up before the sun. When Silas came into the kitchen, coffee was already brewing, and the beginnings of a proper breakfast were on the stove. He just nodded, a look of quiet surprise on his face, and took the cup she offered him. The days fell into a routine. Ilera ran the house with an ironclad efficiency that left Silas and Jeb vaguely bewildered. The house stayed clean. Meals were on time. Mending was done. But she did more than that. She started a small kitchen garden in a patch of protected soil behind the house, using her knowledge of the land to choose a spot that would hold water. She inventoried the pantry, creating a list of what they had and what they would need to survive the winter. She was creating a system. She was building a fortress against the coming hardship. She kept to herself. She spoke when spoken to. She did her work. She never mentioned the auction. She never mentioned the debt. She locked her door every night, the sound of the bowl to comfort. About a week after her arrival, the problem with the Northwell pump became critical. It wasn't just acting up anymore. It had seized completely. Ilera stood at a distance, watching Silas and Jeb work on it. They were strong men, capable men, but they were attacking the problem with brute force. They grunted and sweated, pulling on wrenches, trying to turn a massive gear that refused to budge. "Damn things rusted solid," Jeb grumbled, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of a greasy hand. "It can't be," Silas said, his voice tight with frustration. "I oiled it last month." He kicked the housing of the pump, a rare show of temper. The resulting clang was unsatisfying. Ilera watched. She had seen pumps like this before. She understood the basic mechanics. She had listened to the sound it made for the past week, a rhythmic grinding that had grown progressively worse. It wasn't a sound of rust. It was something else. She stepped forward. "It's not rust," she said quietly. Both men stopped and turned to look at her. It was the first time she had offered an opinion on anything outside the house. Jeb's face was a mask of skepticism. "What would you know about it, girl?" The word girl stung, but she ignored it. She looked at Silas. The sound it was making, it was grit. There's something inside the housing, grinding against the gears. Silas looked at the pump, then back at her. He was frustrated and tired, but he was also a man who valued competence. And he had seen her competence in his own kitchen. "What kind of grit?" he asked. "Finiscend, almost like dust, but harder. From the creek bed, I think. The wind carries it from the dry parts." She had spent an afternoon walking that dry creek, crumbling the sediment between her fingers, understanding its texture, its composition. It was an unconscious habit, the way she read the world. Jeb snorted. "Sand ain't gonna stop a half-ton steel pump. It will if it gets in the grease," Alara said, her confidence growing. It makes a paste. It hardens. It's like stone. Silas stared at her, a long, considering look. He was seeing past the plain face, the sturdy frame. He was seeing the mind behind them. How do we fix it? It was a question. A real question. He was asking for her expertise. You can't force it, she said. You'll shear the teeth off the gear. You have to dissolve the paste. We need kerosene. And patience. Jeb looked like he was about to argue, but Silas held up a hand. Get the kerosene, Jeb. The old man shot Alara a look that was a mixture of annoyance and grudging respect, then shuffled off toward the barn. For the next 2 days, Alara directed the repair. She had them build a small dam of clay around the gear housing. She had them pour in the kerosene and let it sit, tapping the housing periodically with a hammer to send vibrations through the metal. It's about listening, she told Silas as they sat in the shade waiting. You can hear the change as the kerosene works its way in. He didn't say anything. He just watched her, his expression unreadable. On the 3rd day, she took the long wrench herself. She placed it on the bolt. Now, she said. Easy. Silas put his hands over hers on the wrench. Jeb stood on the other side. Together, she said. Slowly, they pulled. At first, nothing. Then a groan. Not a protest, but of release. A shudder ran through the metal. And then, with a thick, sucking sound, the gear turned. Jeb let out a low whistle. Silas looked from the pump to Alara. His hands were still over hers on the wrench. He seemed to realize it at the same moment she did. He pulled them away, but not before she felt the warmth of his skin. He looked at her, and the assessing gaze was back, but this time it was filled with a dawning awe. What else can you do? He asked, the words a quiet breath of wonder. The question hung in the air between them. It was a door opening, a recognition. In that moment, she was not Lot 24. She was not the sturdy, plain woman from the auction block. She was the person who had fixed the pump. A fierce, unfamiliar pride surged through her. It was terrifying. It was wonderful. I can read, she said simply, and I'm good with numbers. Ja. That night, after a supper that was quiet but charged with a new kind of energy, Silas Holt did something he had not done in a year. He retrieved a dusty, leather-bound ledger from a locked chest in his small office. He brought it into the kitchen, where Alara was wiping down the last of the counters. He placed it on the clean wooden table. The sound was a heavy, definitive thud. You said you were good with numbers, he said. It was not a question. Alara looked at the ledger. She knew what it was. It was the heart of the ranch, its lifeblood, or its death warrant. The bank in the next county over is threatening foreclosure, Silas said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. He was stating a fact, the way he'd stated she needed to eat. They say I'm behind on payments. I know I am, but the numbers they're sending me, they don't feel right. Every month, we fall further behind, no matter how hard we work. He looked tired. The fight was draining out of him, not in a single rush, but drop by painful drop. I'm a rancher, he said, a note of self-deprecation in his voice. I understand cattle and fences. I don't understand this. He tapped the cover of the ledger. It's a different language. I can look at it, Alara said. He opened the ledger. The pages were filled with columns of his own tight, controlled handwriting. Dates, expenses, income from cattle sales, debts. I've gone over it 100 times, he said, rubbing his face. The money comes in, the money goes out. There's just never enough. He pushed the book toward her. He also laid out a stack of letters from the bank, the Sterling Trust and Loan Company. The name, Sterling, the man who had built the dam upstream. I'll need paper, she said, and new pencil. For the next week, the kitchen table became her domain. By day, she did her chores, her hands busy with the physical work of the ranch. But by night, under the soft glow of an oil lamp, she entered the world of the ledger. She did not just read it. She absorbed it. She built it in her mind, not as a list of numbers, but as a system, a flow, money in, money out. She created her own charts on scraps of paper, tracking expenses over the past 3 years. Feed costs, vet bills, equipment repair. Silas and Jeb left her alone. They would see the light in the kitchen burning late into the night, and they would not disturb her. They seemed to understand that a different kind of crucial work was being done. At first, it looked just as Silas had described. A slow, relentless bleed. A ranch barely breaking even, tipped into debt by a series of small misfortunes. A bad winter. A low price for calves. But Alara was looking for a pattern. Her mind, honed by years of observing the natural world, sought the unnatural, the thing that did not belong. And then she found it. It was small. A single entry, almost 3 years ago. An expense for fence repair, north pasture. The amount was not large, but it was noted as being paid to a contractor she hadn't seen listed before. A company called Western Land Services. She saw the name again a few months later. Well, maintenance then again. Cattle feed supplement. The payments were irregular but consistent. They were always for plausible expenses, but they were never paid to the local suppliers that Silas used for everything else. She cross-referenced the dates of the payments with the ranch's activity. The fence repair was dated for a month in the dead of winter when the ground was frozen solid. The well maintenance was for a well that she knew, from listening to Jeb's stories, had been dry for 5 years. It was a phantom ledger, a ghost draining the life from the real one. She pulled out the letters from Sterling Trust and Loan. The letterhead was crisp, expensive. The signature on the bottom of each one was a confident, arrogant scrawl. Arthur Sterling, President. She went back to the ledger. She looked at the entry for the first payment to Western Land Services. Next to it, in the margins, Silas had made a small note. Pa, esa recomendación. A. S. Arthur Sterling. A cold certainty settled in her stomach. She kept digging. She found that every time the ranch had a good month, a month where it looked like Silas might get ahead, a new, unexpected bill from Western Land Services would appear, draining the surplus away. It was a carefully managed decline. Not a murder, but a slow poisoning. The final piece fell into place when she found an old county map tucked into the back of the ledger. It showed the property lines, Stony Creek Ranch, and the larger, wealthier ranch to the north, which bordered the river, the Sterling Ranch, and she saw the path of the creek. It originated on Sterling's land, flowed through a corner of Silas's property, the part with the best grazing land, now dry, and then continued on. Sterling hadn't just dammed the creek. He was systematically bankrupting the man downstream. He wanted the land. Not just his own, but Silas's too. She sat back, the enormity of it washing over her. This wasn't just debt. It was a conspiracy, a deliberate, calculated campaign to destroy Silas Holt. The kitchen was cold. The lamp was burning low. She looked at the neat columns of her own work, the evidence laid bare. She had done more than fix a pump. She had uncovered a war. The next day, a shiny black buggy pulled up in front of the ranch house. It was an ostentatious display of wealth in this dusty, practical world. A man stepped down. He was handsome in a polished, manicured way. He wore a tailored suit, his boots polished to a mirror shine. He moved with an easy confidence that bordered on arrogance. Alara was sweeping the porch. She saw him, and her hand tightened on a broom. She knew, with absolute certainty, who he was. Arthur Sterling. He saw her, and his eyes swept over her in a single, dismissive glance. The look was familiar. It was the look of the men in the town square. It cataloged her plainness, her size, and dismissed her as part of the scenery. "Is Holt here?" he asked, his voice smooth and pleasant. It was the voice of a man used to getting what he wanted. Before she could answer, Silas came around the corner of the house. He saw Sterling, and his whole body went rigid. "Sterling," Silas said. The name was a piece of gravel in his mouth. "Silas," Sterling boomed, spreading his arms wide in a gesture of false friendship. "Just came by to see how you were faring. Heard you were having some trouble with the Northwell." His eyes flicked to Alara again, a flicker of amusement in them. "And I see you've acquired some help." The pause was deliberate, insulting. He was letting them know he'd heard the story of the auction. He was reminding Silas of his poverty and Alara of her shame. "This is Miss Alara," Silas said, his voice dangerously quiet. He moved to stand slightly in front of her, a subtle, protective gesture. "She worked for me. Sterling's smile widened. It didn't reach his eyes. Of course. A man in your position needs all the help he can get. He turned his attention back to Silas, but his words were still aimed, in part, at Alara. I was just talking to the bank. They're getting nervous, Silas. They're talking foreclosure. I told them you were a good man, just down on your luck. I'm trying to help you. The lie was so blatant, so audacious, it almost took her breath away. I have a new offer for you, Sterling continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. A generous one. I'll buy the land. All of it. Pay off your debt to the bank, and leave you with enough to start fresh somewhere else. Somewhere with more water, perhaps. He was offering to buy the land he was actively killing. Silas stared at him, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Alara could feel the rage radiating from him. He was a man of action, and his every instinct was screaming at him to hit this smiling, polished liar. But then he glanced at Alara. He saw the broom in her hands, the stillness of her posture. He saw the ledger, which he knew she had been studying, in his mind's eye. He saw the pump, working. He took a breath. The tension in his shoulders eased, just a fraction. I'm not selling, Sterling, Silas said, his voice level. Sterling's smile finally faltered. He was not used to being told no. He looked from Silas's resolute face to Alara's impassive one. He was a man who understood power dynamics, and he could sense that the dynamic here had shifted. He had come expecting to deal with one broken man. He had found two people standing together. He saw Alara not as a person, but as a variable, a new piece on the board he didn't understand, and it angered him. You're a fool, Holt, he said, the pleasant mask dropping away to reveal the ugliness beneath. You'll be begging me to take this land off your hands in 6 months, and the price will be much, much lower. He turned his back on them, climbed into his buggy, and rode away in a cloud of dust and self-importance. Silas stood watching him go, his jaw tight. Alara did not move. She waited until the buggy was a small black speck on the horizon. Then she turned to Silas. We need to talk, she said. Bring the map. Vogue. That evening, the kitchen table was a war room. The ledger was open. Her own neat charts were laid out beside it. The county map was spread in the center, held down at the corners by coffee cups. The lamp cast long shadows, making the two of them into solemn conspirators. Alara pointed a steady finger at the map. He's choking you, she said, her voice low and certain. He dammed the creek here, which dried out your best pasture. But that wasn't enough. He's been bleeding you dry for 3 years, using a fake company to bill you for work that was never done. She walked him through it, step by logical step. She showed him the phantom bills from Western Land Services. She showed him how they always arrived just when he had a little extra cash. She pointed to the A.S. recommendation in the margin of his own ledger. Silas listened, his face a grim mask. He was a man who prized honesty, and the depth of this betrayal was a physical blow. Arthur Sterling wasn't just a neighbor. He was someone his father had done business with, someone he had, on some level, trusted. He wants the land, Alara concluded, her finger tracing the border between the two ranches, all of it. He wants your water rights, even the ones that are dry right now. He's not trying to beat you. He's trying to erase you. When she was finished, silence filled the room. Silas stared at the map, at the damning evidence laid out on his kitchen table by the woman he had bought at an auction. He slowly clenched and unclenched his fists. I'll kill him, he said, the words a low, guttural promise. No, Alara said immediately. He looked at her, his eyes blazing. He's a thief and a liar. He deserves to be beaten, she interrupted, her voice firm. But not by you, not with your fists. If you go after him now, you'll be the one who ends up in jail. You'll be the hot-headed rancher who assaulted the respectable businessman. That's what he wants. He's trying to provoke you into doing something stupid. She leaned forward, her expression intense. You cannot fight him on his terms. He is richer than you, more powerful than you, and has more friends in high places. If you fight him with anger, you will lose. Then how do we fight him? Silas asked, the fight in his voice draining away, replaced by a weary frustration. With this, Alara said, tapping the ledger. With the truth, but quietly. We gather the evidence. We make copies of everything. We find out where Western Land Services is registered. We build a case so strong that when we finally present it, he will have nowhere to run. She was no longer just his hired hand. She was his strategist. She was thinking 2 steps ahead, seeing the traps he was about to walk into. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw the formidable intellect, the quiet courage. He saw the woman who had transformed his kitchen, fixed his pump, and now was offering to save his ranch. "We," he repeated, the words soft with wonder. She had included herself. She had taken his fight as her own. Alara met his gaze. The flush that rose on her cheeks was not of shame, but of purpose. "Yes," she said, "we." It was a declaration of allegiance. A treaty signed in the quiet of a lamplit kitchen. From that moment, they were partners. Their alliance changed everything. They worked in secret. During the day, they were master and servant, rancher and housekeeper. But at night, they were general's planning campaign. Alara taught Silas how to read the ledgers, how to see the patterns. He, in turn, provided the context, the names, the history of deals and disputes that gave her numbers meaning. They discovered that Western Land Services was a shell company, registered to a post office box in a town 100 miles away. The address was a dead end. Sterling, sensing a change in the wind, began to escalate. He couldn't understand why Silas hadn't broken yet. He had expected the arrival of the auctioned woman to be the final straw, a mark of ultimate failure. Instead, the ranch seemed to be stabilizing. So the attacks became more direct. A section of fence was cut in the night, letting a dozen head of cattle wander off. It took Silas and Jeb 3 days to round them all up. Then the rumors started in town. Vicious whispers that the plain woman at the Holt Ranch was more than just a housekeeper. That Silas Holt had fallen so low he was consorting with his bought property. The same people who had laughed at her humiliation now whispered about her supposed immorality. Alara heard the whispers on a rare trip to town with Silas to buy supplies. The way the women in the general store fell silent when she entered. The way the men smirked at her. The old shame, which she had thought buried, pricked at her. She saw the pain and anger in Silas's face as he defended her honor with a cold, dangerous stare that silenced the smirks. But the poison had been released into the air. One evening, Alara overheard Jeb talking to one of the young ranch hands they had hired for the season. "It's her," the young hand said. "The ranch had bad luck before, but it's gotten worse since she came. She's a bad omen." "Shut your mouth, boy," Jeb had growled. "That woman's got more sense in her little finger than you've got in your whole damn head. The luck was always bad. She's just the first one to put a name to it." Jeb's defense was a bomb, but the young hand's words echoed her deepest fear. Was she the cause? Was her presence, her fight, bringing this ruin down on Silas's head? Sterling's attacks had become personal. He was targeting her reputation as much as Silas's finances. The doubt took root. It was a cold, familiar companion. She was a curse. Her father had said it. The town believed it. Maybe it was true. She looked at Silas, saw the new lines of worry etched around his eyes, the way he stood between her and the world, taking the blows meant for her. And she made a decision. The only decision a worthless, cursed thing could make. She had to leave. It was the only way to save him. She waited until the dead of night. She packed her few belongings into a small bundle. Her wages, which Silas had insisted on paying her, were tucked into her dress. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get her far away from here. She left the iron key on the small wooden chest in her room. She wrote a short, simple note. "Thank you. I am sorry." She crept through the quiet house. The floorboards seemed to scream her betrayal. She was halfway to the door when a new sound reached her. A shout from outside, then another, and the terrifying smell of smoke. She threw open the door. The night was no longer dark. It was lit by a terrible orange glow. The barn was on fire. Flames licked up the old, dry timber, reaching for the stars. It was not an accident. It was an execution. Silas burst out of the house, pulling on his boots. Jeb was already there, a silhouette against the inferno, shouting about the horses trapped inside. Chaos erupted. Silas and Jeb ran toward the flames. The young hands, woken by the commotion, ran back and forth with useless buckets of water. Alara stood frozen on the porch, her bundle of belongings in her hand. Her plan to flee, to save him by leaving, seemed like a childish fantasy in the face of this real, roaring destruction. She saw Silas run to the main barn door. It was blocked by a fallen, burning beam. The horses were screaming inside. The back door. Jeb yelled. It might still be clear. Silas didn't hesitate. He ran toward the back of the barn, disappearing into the thick, acrid smoke. One of the young hands, a boy named Tom, grabbed Alara's arm. We have to get back. The whole thing is going to collapse. But Alara's eyes were fixed on the fire. This was Sterling's final move. He wasn't just trying to bankrupt Silas anymore. He was trying to burn him out, soul and property. And she had been about to run. A profound, gut-wrenching shame, deeper than any she had felt at the auction, washed over her. She had been about to abandon the only person who had ever treated her with dignity, the only place she had started to feel, not at home, but not entirely lost. She dropped her bundle. The note fluttered to the porch steps. No, she said, her voice hoarse. She ran off the porch, not away from the fire, but toward it. She grabbed a horse blanket, soaking in a trough, and threw it over her head and shoulders. What are you doing? Tom yelled. The ledgers, she croaked, her throat raw from the smoke. The evidence is in the office. Silas's small office was part of the main house, but it was the closest room to the barn. Sparks were already landing on the roof. She ran inside, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She burst into the office. She didn't grab the main ledger. She grabbed the folder containing her own meticulous notes, the copy she had made of the fraudulent bills, the marked-up map, the case against Sterling. As she turned to leave, she saw him. Silas, staggering out of the smoke, his face black with soot, his arm wrapped around the neck of a terrified, coughing horse. He had gotten one out. He saw her, standing in the doorway of his office, the folder clutched to her chest. His eyes, raw and red from the smoke, widened in confusion. Then he saw the bundle of her belongings lying on the porch steps. He understood. He led the horse to safety, handing the reins to Jeb, and then he strode toward her. He was a terrifying figure, a man who had just walked through fire. His anger was a palpable force. You were leaving, he said. It was not a question. It was an accusation. She started, but the words wouldn't come. You were running away, he said, his voice a low, furious growl. He grabbed her arm, not gently like before. His grip was like iron. After all this, you think I'm the kind of man who would be safer if you ran. I bring bad luck, she whispered, the words tasting like poison. I'm the cause of this. You are the cause of this? He demanded, his voice rising. He gestured wildly at the burning barn, at the ranch, at the whole damn world. You are the only reason any of this is still standing. You fixed the pump. You found the thief in my books. You gave me a reason to fight when I was ready to give up. And you think you are the curse. He let go of her arm and grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. The curse is men like Sterling, he said, his voice raw with a passion she had never heard. The curse is a town that would laugh while a good woman is sold. You are not the curse, Alara. You are the goddamn cure. He had never used her name before. Not like that. It sounded strange and wonderful in his mouth. I've been defending you, he choked out, the anger giving way to a desperate pain. In town, to Jeb, to myself. I keep telling them you are not what they think you are, and you are going to prove them right. You are going to run and leave me to burn. Tears streamed down his soot-stained face, carving clean paths through the grime. Don't you leave, he whispered, his forehead resting against hers. Don't you dare leave me to fight this alone. The barn roared, a funeral pyre for his past. But in the inferno's light, something new was being forged between them. Not just an alliance. Something deeper. Something that would not be broken. Alara looked at this man, this good, decent man who was willing to lose everything for his principles. She looked at the folder in her hands, the the weapon she had built. "I'm not leaving," she said, her voice clear and strong above the roar of the flames. "I'm not running. We're going to finish this together." The fire was a catastrophe. Silas lost 2 horses, a winter's worth of hay, and most of his tools. The barn was a smoking skeleton. Financially, it was the final blow. He was ruined. But as the sun rose on the wreckage, the mood at Stony Creek Ranch was not one of defeat. It was one of grim resolution. The fire had burned away the last of Silas's hesitation, the last of Alara's doubt. Jeb, who had seen Silas risk his life for the horses, was now Alara's staunchest defender. The young hands, who had witnessed her run toward the danger to save the papers, looked at her with a new, awestruck respect. They were a unit now, forged in fire. 2 days later, the official notice arrived. A foreclosure hearing. It was to be held at the town hall in 1 week. Arthur Sterling had won, or so he thought. The hearing was a public event. The town hall was packed. The same faces that had been in the square for the auction were here for the foreclosure. They had come to see the final act of Silas Holt's downfall. Sterling was there, seated at the front next to the county commissioner, a man known to be in Sterling's pocket. He looked somber and regretful, playing the part of the concerned friend forced to witness a tragedy. He gave Silas a sad, knowing nod as he and Alara entered. Silas was clean and dressed in his best, though worn clothes. He looked grim but resolute. Alara walked beside him. She wore her one simple, clean dress. She held a large, worn folder in her hands. She did not look at the crowd. She looked straight ahead at the commissioner's table. The proceedings began. The commissioner droned on about the debt, the missed payments, the unfortunate but necessary legal process. It was a foregone conclusion. "Mr. Holt," the commissioner said, his tone oozing false sympathy, "do you have anything to say before we finalize the transfer of the property deed to the Sterling Trust and loan to cover your outstanding obligations?" Silas stood up. "I do," he said, his voice clear and steady. It carried to every corner of the room. "I have nothing, but Miss Alara has something she would like to present." He sat down. All eyes turned to Alara. A woman? The auction woman? What could she possibly have to say? A murmur of confusion and derision went through the crowd. Sterling smirked. This was perfect. Holt was so broken he was letting his horse speak for him. It was a pathetic end. Alara stood up. She walked to the table. She opened her folder. She did not speak with passion. She did not raise her voice. She spoke as if she were explaining a simple, mathematical proof. "For the past 3 years," she began, her voice quiet but carrying, "Stony Creek Ranch has been the victim of systematic fraud." She laid out the first of her hand-drawn charts. It showed the ranch's income and expenses. As you can see, the ranch is a marginal operation. It breaks even in good years and falls behind in bad ones. This is the story of most ranches in this valley. She then laid a second chart beside it. But this chart shows the payments made to a company called Western Land Services. She looked directly at Arthur Sterling. "A company, I believe, you are familiar with." Sterling's smile tightened. The commissioner shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "These payments were for services never rendered," Alara continued, her voice gaining strength. "Fence repair in the middle of a frozen winter. Maintenance on a well that has been dry for 5 years. A special feed supplement ordered in a month when the cattle were on open range and not receiving supplement." She went on, her voice a relentless, logical instrument. She presented the dates, the amounts. She presented her copy of the ledger page where Silas had noted Sterling's recommendation. "These fraudulent charges were not random," she said, her voice ringing with certainty. "They were strategic. They appeared only in months when the ranch had a surplus. They were designed to keep the ranch in a state of perpetual debt, to make it weak, to make it vulnerable." The crowd was silent now. This was not the simple foreclosure they had come to see. This was something else entirely. "This is an outrageous accusation," the commissioner blustered. "You have no proof." "Oh, but I do," Alara said calmly. She pulled out the county map. "The fraud is only part of the story. The motive is here." She spread the map on the table. "Mr. Sterling built a dam here," she said, pointing. cutting off the water to Stony Creek. Then he began the financial assault. Why? Because he doesn't just want his own land to be profitable. He wants Mr. Holt's land, and more importantly, the water rights that go with it. Sterling finally stood up, his face a mask of rage. The polished veneer had cracked. This is preposterous. The ramblings of a bitter, ignorant woman. What would a fat, stupid farm girl know of business and finance? The words were a fatal error. The insult, so raw, so full of classist, sexist vitriol, hung in the air. He had not denied the accusation. He had attacked the accuser. He had confirmed everything she had just said about his character. The crowd, which had been on his side, shifted. They had laughed at her in the square, but this, in a formal hearing, was different. This was ugly. Alara didn't flinch. She had been waiting for this. It was the final piece of her trap. She looked not at Sterling, but at the crowd, at the faces of the people who had judged her. "He is right about one thing," she said, her voice clear as a bell. "I'm a farm girl, and as a farm girl, I know that you don't order a special delivery of expensive feed supplement in June when your cattle are grazing on 100 acres of fresh grass. It's a ridiculous, illogical expense." She turned her gaze back to Sterling, and her eyes were chips of ice. "And only the man who fraudulently submitted that bill, a man who knows nothing about the real work of ranching, will be stupid enough to think no one would notice." She had him. She had exposed not just his crime, but the arrogance and ignorance behind it. She had used his own prejudice against him. Sterling stared at her, his mouth opening and closing. He had been beaten, not by a rancher with a gun, but by a woman with a ledger. He had underestimated her, and it had cost him everything. The silence in the room was absolute. Then, from the back, someone started to clap. It was a slow, hesitant sound. Then another person joined in, and another. Soon, the entire room, save for Sterling and the commissioner, was filled with the sound of applause. It was the sound of public vindication. It was the opposite of the laughter that had haunted her. It was a wave of approval, and it washed over her, and for a moment, she thought she might drown in it. Silas stood up and put a hand on the small of her back. A simple, steadying pressure. He was not taking her victory. He was supporting it. A sheriff, who had been standing at the back of the room, a man known for his honesty, stepped forward. He looked at the evidence on the table, at Sterling's apoplectic face, and at the resolute woman who had brought him down. "Mr. Sterling," the sheriff said, his voice calm and final, "I think you and I need to have a talk." The fight was over. Gee, the aftermath was swift. Arthur Sterling was arrested. The investigation that followed, spurred by Alara's meticulous evidence, uncovered a web of corruption that reached far beyond the valley. The Sterling Trust and Loan Company collapsed under the weight of its president's crimes. The dam he had built was declared illegal and ordered to be dismantled. The townspeople, with the fickle nature of crowds, now treated Alara with a kind of reverent awe. They called her Miss Alara with a new respect. They made way for her in the street. The women who had scorned her now offered her friendly greetings. She accepted it all with a quiet, unnerving grace. It meant nothing to her. Their approval was as worthless as their scorn had been. The only approval that mattered was the quiet, constant presence of Silas Holt at her side. They rebuilt. The whole community, shamed into action, turned out for a barn raising at Stony Creek Ranch. It was a new barn, better than the old one. As she watched the men work, she saw the young hand, Tom, showing another boy how to properly brace a post, using a technique she had quietly demonstrated a month before. Her knowledge was becoming part of the land, part of its people. One evening, a few weeks after the hearing, when the new barn was finished and the first green shoots were appearing in her kitchen garden, Silas found her sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. For the first time in 3 years, a small, steady trickle of water was flowing in the creek bed. He sat down in the chair beside her. They sat in comfortable silence for a long time, watching the light fade. "I went to the county office today," he said finally. She waited. "I had the deed to the ranch redrawn," he said, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "It's in 2 names now, Silas Holt and Alara Vance." Alara turned to look at him. She couldn't speak. It's not a gift, he said quickly, turning to face her, his expression earnest, almost pleading. You earned it. Every damn inch of it. This place would be gone without you. I would be gone without you. You earned it with the pump and the ledger and the fire. You bled for this land as much as I have. He took a deep breath. And I am not asking you to marry me, he said, the words coming out in a rush. I'm not trying to trap you or obligate you. This is yours, whether you stay or go. You are a free woman with your own land. That is what you have earned. He was offering her everything. Freedom, security, a home. And he was asking for nothing in return. He was giving her the choice she had never had. The choice to stay or the choice to leave, but this time as a landowner, not a fugitive. She looked out at the land, her land. She looked at the ranch house, her house. She looked at this good, quiet man who had seen her, truly seen her, from the very beginning. She thought of the vow she had made in the alley, the vow to never trust, to never hope. It felt like a lifetime ago. It felt like it had been made by a different person. I'm not going anywhere, Silas, she said, her voice soft but firm. He looked relieved, a deep, profound relief that seemed to settle into his bones. I am not staying because I have to, she continued, wanting him to understand. I am not staying because you have given me this. She gestured to the land around them. I am staying because I choose to. She was choosing him. She was choosing this life, not as a survivor, but as an architect. He reached out and took her hand. His rough, callous palm enveloped hers. It was not a gesture of ownership or even passion. It was a gesture of partnership, of quiet, unbreakable commitment. They sat there on the porch, hand in hand, as the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared. The house was quiet behind them. The land was quiet before them. The water trickled in the creek bed, a soft, promising music. It was the sound of a new beginning. Her new beginning, the one she had built for herself.